Our Free and Equal segment tonight. The Washington Post is having a hard time hiding their liberal agenda. Today, they published an article on the one-year anniversary of the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando. In that article, they refuse to acknowledge that it was a terror attack, and they make no mention that the shooter was Muslim or that he shouted Allahu Akbar during the killing. Watch.
Shit. How about the what? You did the band? What?
With me now from the Daily Caller, Amber Athey. Amber, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Liz.
It's hard to believe that was a year ago. It still seems like it was just yesterday. It was 49 people. I'm glad that so many people on social media are remembering, are taking a moment of this day to honor those people who were killed in what clearly, Amber, to me and to everyone who looked at the facts of the case, was a terror attack. Amber, I want to talk about this Washington Post article. In this article, there's not one mention, not one word, no mention of Islam, no mention of the fact that Omar Mateen was Muslim, no mention of the word ISIS, and no mention of the fact that Mateen pledged his allegiance to ISIS leader al-Baghdadi during his phone call.
You're exactly right. The Washington Post article doesn't make one mention of terror. And sadly, we're seeing this all across the liberal media. If you look at the Orlando Sentinel article that came out just last week, they questioned what the motive of the killer was. I mean, really? He told us what his motive was. He said in his 911 call that he was pledging allegiance to ISIS. He wrote on Facebook before the attack that the real Muslims have to cleanse the dirty West. So it's rather insulting that the media thinks they can get away with lying to people and trying to cover up what the motive for this attack was. It was a radical Islamic terrorist attack, but they would rather play political correctness than they would tell people the truth.
Right, in the article that you're mentioning from the Orlando Sentinel, this is the title of it, Pulse Gunman's Motive, Plenty of Theories but Few Answers. Amber, in this article, they actually suggest, they're still floating the idea, which I didn't know anyone was still floating this idea, that Omar Mateen was secretly gay and self-loathing, and that's why he went to a predominantly gay nightclub and committed his massacre there. I mean, absolutely insane.
Right, and intelligence officials have already said that there is no evidence to back up that claim that he was secretly gay. And it's just the media constantly trying to, cover up the fact that there is a problem with Islam and terror. And yes, there are good Muslims, there are peaceful Muslims, of course. No one is arguing against that. But if we look at some statistics here, let's look at British Muslims. Nearly a quarter of British Muslims sympathized with the London subway bombers, and nearly a quarter of British Muslims want to implement Sharia law in their own country, which, as you are well aware, is not very sympathetic to women and gay people. So we have to be able to ask these questions. What is it about the ideology of Islam that makes people so susceptible to radicalization? And instead of asking those important questions, the media would rather say that people are Islamophobic if they try to call it out.
Right. You're absolutely correct, because I don't think you don't have to have it one way or the other. You can acknowledge that the religion of Islam is not inherently a violent religion if you so choose, if that's the logical conclusion you want to draw, and also say there's a problem with the leadership who don't condemn this radicalized version that inspires terrorism. But also, Amber, also not a binary choice. Back to this narrative for a moment that Omar Mateen targeted these people because they were gay. I don't think it's a binary choice that it can be a hate crime and a crime perpetuated because of his beliefs in radical Islam. I mean, part of the teachings of Sharia law, ISIS condemns gay people, thinks that they all deserve to die, pushes them off the roofs of buildings. It's not one or the other, it's both.
Right, there's no question that there are atrocities committed against gay people in the Middle East in the name of Islam all the time, way too often, more often than people would like to admit. And I think the silver lining to this, though, is that people are not buying this. If you were on Twitter looking at the Washington Post and Orlando Sentinel stories, people were responding very angrily because they know what's going on. They can tell that there's a problem with Islam here. And, CNN is obviously trying to push this as well. They had to stage a Muslim-led anti-terror protest last week to try to push this narrative that, it's not Islam, it's just a few bad apples, but people clearly aren't buying it.
No, they're not. And I mean, they're still trying to push the gun narrative too. The Orlando Sentinel article, it said Pulse gunman's motive, not Pulse terrorist, not Pulse killer, the Pulse gunman. The gun is the medium through which he killed someone, not his motivation, not his action. The gun did not kill people. he killed people. And the fact that people are still trying to make this about guns, I mean, I guess my question to you, Amber, is why do they do this? Don't Democrats realize that when we don't acknowledge the motivation, when we don't acknowledge that radical Islamic beliefs are behind this, that leaves other Americans in danger?
Right, and I think a lot of this is just plain old virtue signaling, the left trying to pretend that they're, the tolerant left. They care about all of the minorities, and so they consider Muslims to be a minority, but they completely ignore the fact that Islam can actively harm minorities like women and gay people and black people. But like I mentioned, people aren't really buying it. CNN actually had a 10-year-old on from the Manchester bombing. She was at the Ariana Grande concert with her mother. And her mother said that the first thing her 10-year-old said to her when she heard the bombs go off was she turned to her and she said, "Is it the terrorists? Are the terrorists coming?" So even a 10-year-old knows and can acknowledge that there's a trend that's happening here, and the media is just either too blind, too scared, or too politically correct to admit it.
Right, or perhaps all three. Amber, thanks so much for coming on the show. It was great to talk to you.